Back to the program, we're discussing the common but controversial practice of fracking. Join us again to discuss this is Dr. Michael K. Dorsey from the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. We also have a leading authority on fracking from Pennsylvania, Dr. Terry Engler. He is a geoscience professor at Penn State University, and he was instrumental in revolutionizing fracking in the United States. Also joining me in the studio as well is energy expert and consultant, Dr. Katie Brown. Thanks again to all of you for joining us. Dr. Engler, you wanted to say something before we went to the break.
Yes, I did. I would like to comment on a couple of statements that Dr. Dorsey has made. One concerns this issue of greed. It's a common thought that somehow or another a very small number of people are benefiting from this revolution, and yet we have to look at the bigger picture. In the United States, for example, the price of gas right now is much less than $4 a thousand cubic feet. The Europeans are paying on the order of 3 times that much, and this has been going on for a number of years. And this difference in the cost of gas between Europe and America, for example, can be thought of as one of the largest tax breaks that Americans have ever had. And this money then rolls on down through the economy, and it is important to appreciate then the cost of a lot of this energy in terms of making it available to the American citizens. It's not an inexpensive process that requires a considerable upfront investment. And one of the arguments has been made concerning the rate at which a conversion to green energy can be made.
Right.
And natural gas, for example, is touted as a bridge fuel, and that's exactly what's going to happen in terms of looking at the future. But the length of time through which this bridge fuel will be very important to the American economy is considerable. It's a fuel that's used for a lot of things, such as manufacture of fertilizer.
Right, okay.
There are industrial applications that just can't be replaced.
Dr. Dorsey, is that a fair point that, it's a lot of the country gets the benefit of fracking because it does bring down gas prices, and as Dr. Engler points out, it is in effect a tax break for most of the country?
You know, under the old 20th century narrow microeconomic, almost neoliberal economic viewpoint, Dr. Engler is precisely right. But that viewpoint falls apart when you begin to include the social harms, the environmental harms, the public health harms from this practice. And the fact is that we now also live in a world, which Dr. Engler certainly knows, because he said very clearly that gas is a bridge fuel, and it's a bridge to what? To wind and solar and renewable technology. That's what he's referring to there. And the reality is now we live in a country where in 20 states, solar energy power is on parity with conventional energy power. And that's not even considering some of the subsidies that consumers have that actually brings the cost down even further. So the reality is that there is this gap that makes this attractive in a narrow economic way, but when you add in those harms, the environmental harms, the social harms, the public health harms, those gains, they fall apart. And they really tee us up to do just what Dr. Engler said, to get us quickly off that bridge and to get us across it to that solar and wind future that really is 21st century energy technology.
All right, Dr. Brown, what do you make of that argument? I mean, what has fracking done for the United States?
Well, the benefits are immense. We're seeing manufacturing coming back to the United States, thousands and thousands of jobs there. We're seeing local government coffers being filled with millions of dollars in shale developing areas. We're seeing unemployment rates going down in areas where there's shale development. And the benefits aren't just economic, they are clear environmental benefits as well. When you look at Pennsylvania, for instance, there are about 500 million tons of pollution removed from the air because of the increased use of natural gas unlocked by hydraulic fracturing. You look at New York City, they have the cleanest air in decades, and it's because they're ramping up their use of natural gas. And then if you look at it in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said that it's because of hydraulic fracturing and natural gas that our emissions have gone to 20-year lows. The International Energy Agency said the same thing. They said that our drop in emissions because of hydraulic fracturing and because of natural gas is the bright spot in the global climate change factor. So,
okay. Michael, I want to get your view on that in a moment, but I want to go to Dr. Engler, then I'm going to pose what seems to be a technical question here. Dr. Engler, you've made the distinction between what's known as natural fracking and commercial fracking. What is that difference?
Rock splits naturally when hydrocarbons are produced. Oil and gas, as a result of a chemical reaction, generate high pressure in rocks, and the pressure is high enough so rocks will split. This is particularly common in gas shales, and in fact it's that natural process that then is available for the production of natural gas by having sand propped along these natural fractures. The industrial fracture, we call it a fracking in the industry, that too splits rocks. It splits rocks by having water pumped down under very high pressure. The physics of these two processes are exactly the same.
Michael, I want to get you just to respond to what Katie was saying about the fact that fracking has had benefits for the country, and it has had benefits globally as well when we see that the amount of emissions that the United States is putting into the air has dropped.
You know, to be fair, there is a difference in terms of the amount of emissions, you know, versus oil, okay? There's definitely fewer emissions in terms of greenhouse gases that come out of natural gas, certainly. But the reality is that, again, this is about a bridge technology, and also this point about jobs, it's just not true. Fracking isn't driving, you know, this boom in jobs. Right now in Texas, which most people think of as the big oil state, the big, you know, pump and, you know, and oil and petroleum state, there are more people working in wind than there are in gas in Texas. And that has a lot to do with Texas seeing the future, and the future of energy is about wind and renewables. If you add in solar in that mix, you've got many, many more people. So the jobs aren't there in this sector, and the dangers are really, really huge in terms of the exposures to this stuff, and this is why you've got the government coming out and cracking down on this and ramping up regulations. And the fact is that where they aren't able to regulate, that's the space that we really got to have. If we're going to have a serious conversation about this, we've got to talk about where the regulators aren't even being allowed to go, and that's in the private land space. That's really what the conversation that we've got to have at this table if we're going to be serious about this.
Dr. Brown, do you want to respond to that? And the other point,
Michael, if I understand.
Okay, Dr. Engler, I'll come to you in a moment. Just want to get your response.
Okay.
Should we, if you don't mind the expression, be putting our energy into alternative sources of energy that are sustainable and that don't hurt the environment, things like Michael was pointing out, wind energy?
Well, the truth is that if you are a proponent of wind and solar, you should also be a proponent of natural gas, because in order for these renewable energy technologies to thrive, they need natural gas, because they don't work when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, so they need that baseload power. And when you look at what's happening, wind is actually growing along with natural gas.
Right.
That's something that President Obama said in his address recently, his State of the Union address. He said, we're #1 in oil and natural gas, and we're #1 in wind. And part of the reason for that is because there's a very strong partnership between natural gas and renewables, and natural gas is helping them thrive.
Dr. Engler?
Yes, I was going to point out that if I understood Michael correctly, he said there were more people in Houston and Dallas working in the wind energy industry than in natural gas and oil industry, and I'm not sure that that's correct. The other thing is that the medical profession has looked very hard for cases in which one can demonstrate in a doctor's office that harm is being done by the oil and gas industry, and it's extraordinarily difficult in any longitudinal study to demonstrate that in fact there is a direct harm to people's healths, and there's an awful lot of innuendo out there. But I would challenge you directly to show me the evidence for this harm that you speak about, because I think that it's very easy to raise public fear, but
I'll speak to 2 points. You know, the reality is I didn't say Dallas and Houston. I said all of Texas, and that's a fact. One of the biggest growing sectors in Texas, the whole state, is the wind energy sector. And that's a sector that's actually was allowed to grow because of the policies of George Bush Jr. So he enabled that industry because he, again, was looking around the corner on this. This is really a bipartisan issue. There are some folks on both sides of the aisle that recognize that the future of energy, technology and energy policy in this country is a renewable one. And oftentimes we sort of elide the fact that people on both sides of the political spectrum, and even in between, recognize this fact. So it's not just about Dallas and Houston. We've got across Texas, this is one of the biggest growing industry sectors, wind energy, and not even talking about solar in that state. When you put those two together, it's vastly more people are in this sector, in wind and solar, than in gas. That's a point of fact. That's something that's probably news to Dr. Engler. It's a news to a lot of your viewers, I'm sure.
Right. Dr. Brown, what do we know about public support for fracking in the United States?
Well, I think people recognize the great economic and environmental benefits for sure. Yeah, I think it's pretty strong.
And Dr. Engler, I mean, we talk about the advantages of fracking, of producing natural gas in this way. If we look outside the United States, if we look at Europe, France and the Netherlands, Holland, they've banned fracking altogether. They see more risks than advantages.
Well, again, this is associated with a public fear that has arisen from some events in the United States that frankly have been greatly exaggerated. And I think one will find that this debate over fracking is really a proxy for a debate over climate change and how we move forward as a human race in facing this greater issue. And I don't know how the debate will come out, but
Okay.
It's very clear that there are two sides to the debate.
Right. I want to get one final point in. We just had a little time, Michael. Water is used, of course, for fracking. We know that California used up something like 70 million gallons of water in its method to extract natural gas. This is a scarce resource, and as we see it in California right now.
Indeed, it's one of the reasons why we ought to get out of this. I mean, it takes a lot of hubris, I think, to say that the health ministries of countries like France and other countries in Europe are simply being driven by fear and disproportionate, sort of ideas on this. The fact is that you've got countries across Europe, like you pointed out, you've got states like the governor of New York saying, we're not going to get into this, we don't need to get into this because of the big downsides on public health, on the environment, on society writ large.
Okay.
We can get out of this. We need to.
Dr. Michael Dorsey, Dr. Katie Brown, Dr. Terry Engler, thanks to all of you for joining us. That is